Now, what else can we say? The other part of the story is that the Quran was distributed across the Islamic Empire. Well, can we show that? And with that, we need to do stemmatics. What are stemmatics? In textual criticism, we try to find out how different versions of a text relate to one another. If one text has several differences in relation to another, and then if a second text has those same differences in addition to others, then we can reconstruct the order of copying that these manuscripts have been copied. So I have three almost the same texts here, but if we start looking at what the differences are, we see first, okay, here, this one changed the spelling, color and through, and violet was added over here. And the second one has all those changes. So color is now written with OU, through is no longer written OUGH, but with a U. And violet was added in both, but it adds even more differences. Characteristic is suddenly written with CK, and blue is misspelled with EU. Now, what we can say is we can kind of reconstruct, okay, who was first, who made some changes, and who made even more changes, because it's a layered effect. And what we can say is, well, clearly, this was the original text. Then some changes were made, and then someone else took this text, the second text, and made even more changes, but kept all the old changes. And that way, we can see a kind of interrelationship to these texts. Now, we can do this to the Quran, too. In medieval works, we have many reports of small differences between Qurans that they find in Medina, Kufa, Basra, and Damascus. And we indeed find these in early manuscripts. So, for example, it is reported that in Medina and Damascus, there's فَإِنَّ اللَّهَ الْغَنِيُّ الْحَمِيدُ, while Kufa and Basra is فَإِنَّ اللَّهَ هُوَ الْغَنِيُّ الْحَمِيدُ. And indeed, that's exactly what we find. Here the Hua is missing, here the Hua is present. Two different manuscripts with two different spellings. So we can start looking at these. And this is a great paper by Michael Cook. And recently, Hythem Sidky has done something very similar as well. And actually, already Theodor Nordecke in the 1850s did something similar, but people mostly ignored it. He said, let's look at these variants that are reported in the literary sources, and let's see how they interrelate. And what we see is there's actually a very neat story that comes out of that. Because what we see is that there are 16 unique differences where the Damascus manuscript is different from Medina, Basra, and Kufa. Then there are 13 differences where Medina and Damascus cluster together, and Basra and Kufa cluster together. Finally, Kufa has 6 unique differences compared to Medina, Damascus, and Basra. So it's on its own against these other 3. Now, what Cook noticed, this is the same Michael Cook who in the 70s still thought that the Quran was composed maybe 200 years later, by the way. He said, we can make a stemma out of this. We can say, well, Damascus was the original manuscript. Then when it was copied, 16 differences snuck in. And once the Basran copy was copied, it was copied from the Medina copy, and it introduced another 13 differences. And then when the Kufa copy was copied from the Basra copy, another 6 were introduced. That's not the only solution to these variants. You could also say it's this, that when the Medina one was copied first, and then when Damascus was copied from the Medina one, 16 differences were introduced, while when Basra was copied from the Medina one, 13 differences were introduced. So it splits at the Medina one, and then Kufa copies from Basra. You can also do it like this, or also do it like that. But those are the only 4 options. That's the only way that it could have happened. And once we actually look at manuscripts, we see that they actually belong to these different regions. So we see that you have Medinan manuscripts, Damascene manuscripts, Basra manuscripts, Kufan manuscripts.
The colors here represent the ideal assignment of regionality. So Basran is this red, Kufan is a blue, Medinan is this orange, and Syrian is this green. And the solid, okay, so these circles that are empty, that are not colored, represent hypothetical shared ancestors. So this is the shared ancestor of these manuscripts that we're predicting must have existed. And I have just assigned them letters according to what we would expect. Okay, so then solid lines represent a very strong relationship, and dashed lines represent contamination. Okay, so here, looking here, we have Medina M. We have a very strong relationship to all the mushafs that were attributed to Medina, with the exception of this one, but there's a lot of contamination. The same we can say for the Syrian mushafs. And then for the Basran mushafs right here, and the Kufan, we have the Husayni manuscript with contamination from Basran, and the Samarkand, which is a little more Basran potentially, with some contamination from Kufa. Now notice that when I initially presented the picture from Cook, we had only 4 exemplars. But if you look here, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And I labeled one B and one B prime. So what's going on here? Remember that Basran variant I talked to you about that we ignored? So if we actually take that into account, and I just include all the raw data, you can see that there must be a divergence that happens, and this divergence represents the fact that these mushafs have something that was innovated later on, so that it hints at some modification that might have taken place to an original exemplar, a regional exemplar. Okay, the other interesting thing is that this algorithm suggests that the Medianan codex is the most likely Uthmanic archetype. So it seems that this Medianan mushaf was the first mushaf that was written or copied, and from it all of the other codices were copied, and they all descend from the Medianan codex.